We're now joined by a Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Cypress College in the United States, Peter Mathews. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Good to talk to you again. So, explain
Good to talk to you. Thank you, Peter.
Fantastic to have you. Explain to our viewers why the Democrats are celebrating, even though they didn't really make any gains.
Because of expectations. The party that's outside the presidency almost always loses a huge number of seats, between 20 and 50 seats in the midterm elections. This time, Democrats haven't lost nearly that much, and in fact, they actually held on to the Senate, and it looks like they may be able to gain one extra seat. They've already got 50, and it's 50 to 49 right now. And if Reverend Warnock, the senator from Georgia, wins in December against Herschel Walker, which is very possible, then the Democrats will have a 51 to 49 majority, which puts them in better shape than last time around, just a couple of weeks ago. The other thing is that the House is very close right now. There's a very small possibility that Democrats could actually win the House back and keep it by 1 or 2 seats. Because right now, about 204 seats have been won by the Democrats, 211 by the Republicans, and the winning side has to get 218. So Democrats need 14 more seats, Republicans 7 more, and those seats are very, very close, within 1% or 0.5% of margin, and it's looking pretty good because new votes are coming in. Not new votes, but votes that have already been cast that have to be counted. And those tend to be favoring Democrats. They're mostly from the absentee voters or vote by mail voters or drop-off votes. We'll have to see how it goes the next 7 days. There's an outside chance they could do that, so they're very happy. They said the red wave became a red trickle. They blocked it. Very interesting.
All right, so explain, if you can, what has been different about these elections, that they're historic in their nature, you've described, but what was the dynamic that changed the game this time around? Excellent
question. It had to do with the fact that even though American women are 52% of the population, this time they were 55% of the voters, which was much larger than normal. 55% of the votes cast were women. And frankly, out of that, the total votes cast, over half came from, well, the Democrats, let me say that the women voted much more for Democrats, about 10% more than for Republicans, and American men voted 9% more Republican than Democrat, but American men are smaller in number. So this was a good dynamic that helped the Democrats, but also with women and others who are friends of women, we looked at the issue of abortion choice. That was very important in driving them to the polls. And not only abortion, but the issue of freedom of choice and of democracy itself. The American women and many other progressives, including many people of color, as well as young people on the progressive side, came out to vote in droves because of the threat to democracy. The MAGA Republicans on the right wing of the party were threatening democracy with their statements, with backing President Trump, who has denied that President Biden is the true president. The election deniers ran for Congress, and Trump backed almost all of them and lost almost all of them, except for one. So this was a tremendous wave election in the opposite direction, based on democracy, human rights, as well as the economy. That was also an important issue.
Does that mean that there must have been some Republicans who either didn't vote or actually changed their vote?
There were some who voted split ticket. Some voters voted for governor for a Republican candidate and for Congress or Senate Democratic candidate. And that had to do with the pulling and cross pressures of the two different major issue sides. One was democracy and keeping the rule of law, as well as choice on abortion, that's on one side. Against the other side was pulling people in the other direction because of the economy. Many voters were thinking that the Democrats didn't do such a good job in maintaining, in bringing back a strong economy and fighting inflation and other things economic. But Democrats did a pretty good job, in my view, on doing the best they could in a year and a half in getting President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, brought a lot of money in for new jobs and new technologies, and that has to take effect eventually. It takes a little time. So Democrats are asking for 2 more years. But it looks like the voters actually said, you know what, let's give them 2 more years, and especially since we trust them more to fight the MAGA Republicans. We don't trust the Republicans to stand up against this devastating leadership of President Trump, who is about to announce that he's going to run for president. That's going to throw more of a monkey wrench in the whole thing. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens now.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the extremists and the MAGAs and Donald Trump. So his candidates won in the very red areas of the country, but the losses in the other parts, does that reflect on Donald Trump? Or, I mean, he's disowning it, I'm sure, but is that a vote against Donald Trump?
It definitely was a vote against Donald Trump, especially among the independent voters, the non-affiliated Democrat or Republican. Those independent voters broke for the Democrats in larger numbers, and it was because of Donald Trump. They don't trust him coming back and having this kind of strength, since he took a very lead role in this election, very visible. He was campaigning for a lot of candidates that went against those candidates, except in a few states where MAGA are the majority, or at least they are a strong base. Yes, in that case, they won back their Senate seats. They won a couple of House seats. But other than that, the vast majority of the country said, we don't trust that right wing, extreme right wing, who are not only against democracy, but they tend to be racist, xenophobic, exclusive. They believe only a certain ethnic group in America has a right in this country, and most Americans are against that. Most Americans are for inclusivity, in diversity, and the strength of our country is that we are a nation of immigrants, and most of us honored that, and that's why the Democrats and President Biden, in a sense, also won in this election this time.
All right, so you've explained that sitting parties, governing parties, very rarely win in the midterms, and they normally get a good hiding. Joe Biden has done well this time around, but the question is, did they vote for Joe Biden or against the Republicans? Because Joe Biden's popularity isn't great at all at this time.
That's correct. President Biden's approval rating is at about 44%, which is fairly low compared to what it was earlier. And it's about the same as Trump had at this time of his presidency, and a little bit lower than what President Obama had and other presidents, but still it's not a high rating, 44 approval and 50-something% disapproval. So you wonder, how did the Democrats pull this off? Again, I think the voters voted for the progressive agenda, for inclusion, for liberal democracy, and against the potential dictatorship or this terrible potential of having, the instability that was brought about for so many years by Trump and his cohorts. And these were cohorts that he was running. He was putting his own people, trying to get them in there. And I think that it was mostly the voters voted for keeping and preserving democracy and giving Biden, even though they didn't think he did that great a job necessarily, all of the voters, there was a majority of them said, let's give him a little bit more time. He did do some things well. He was able to reduce the COVID infection rates and get the vaccinations out on time. He was able to bring in this plan to invest in new technology and create jobs. It wasn't as much money as he would have liked to, but he can do it again. The voters, I think, were able to say, even though we're not that happy with his performance, because we are struggling with the high prices of gasoline and grocery bills, let's give a little more time and we'll see what the president does. But most importantly, let's vote against this possible MAGA republic that could have arisen. Would have been horrible for the United States and even for the world.
All right, so it's bought him a bit of time, but can he do enough to get re-elected, or is it cutting a fine line and it'll all depend on who the Republicans put forward?
Absolutely, it'll depend on that, because right now everything is in flux, because we don't know what President Trump is going to do on Tuesday when he's making a big announcement, he said. Look at some polling today. It showed that Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida was actually polling about 45% among Republican voters, and Trump was only getting 35% among Republican voters. That's the first time I've seen Trump actually at a lower number among Republicans than another person, DeSantis. So it is possible, even if he announces that he may or may not win the nomination, and if he does announce, though, I think it'll give President Biden more impetus to say, I'm the one who beat Trump last time, I can beat him again, let me stay in there. And one more thing, President Biden does not want to tip his hand, even if he decides not to run in 2024. He won't tell us early, because he'll become a lame duck president. People won't pay attention to him if they know he's leaving. That's why he has to hold off to let us know exactly what he's going to do in 2024. But there is a chance that he may stay and run again in 2024, depending partly on what other people do on the other side. We'll have to wait on Tuesday. It'll be a big seminal event.
The Republicans will probably sit down and have a look at what should have been an easy road, and they'll reflect. Is this an inflection point for the party where they really have to think about what they do next and how they frame their party going forward?
It absolutely is. You've got it right there. It's an inflection point, a fork in the road. They have to decide what they're going to do with their party, or to either save it and salvage it. It's going to take a few years by disavowing Trump and saying this man and his following ilk are not part of our party. It's not the tradition of our party. Democracy. We live in a democratic republic with law. He didn't. His people don't. We're going to change direction. They could say that. Or they can say, you know what, we better hold on and maybe we have to back Trump to some extent because Trump does have millions of followers and we're afraid of him. Some Republicans may think that. That's one reason they have not pushed him aside completely, which they should have done after January 6th, when the insurrectionists tried to create a coup d'etat and overthrow the peaceful transfer of power, which has never been happened in our history. And Trump was the #1 reason for that insurrection. And the people that he rallied and galvanized, they haven't gone away. They're going to create some problems. The Republican Party has to basically clear themselves of that kind of activity and come back on the fold and put themselves on track again to run with American democracy more smoothly. And we'll have that way choices. Voters can vote for a more conservative party that still believes in the rule of law, the Republicans, or a more liberal or progressive party, the Democrats, who believe in the rule of law. I mean, go back to our American traditions once again, which the world has admired before. Otherwise, we can be in terrible shape. And I think the Republicans know that now. It's an inflection point, as you put it. They better make the right decision really soon.
So what does this mean for the likes of Ms. Cheney, who stood out, carrying this flag against this tidal wave? Because in many respects, she's been vindicated now.
Exact word I was just thinking when you brought that up. I would say vindication. She has been vindicated. She stuck to her principles, which is a democratic republic, the belief that rule of law is most important, that party comes secondary, first comes the freedom and the choices and liberal democracy. And we have to respect that first and accept losses. When one side loses, the other side has to accept it as part of the basic foundation of democratic governance. And Liz Cheney was a champion in that regard. She lost her seat because she stood up for that principle. And it's going to really reward her, hopefully, in the near future. We'll have to wait and see what she decides to do with that. But that's a lot of good political capital she has accumulated by standing on principle.
Within the Democratic Party, I mean, could Joe Biden face a primary runoff, or is that unlikely now?
That's always a possibility because, 2 years was when the next, the primaries begin, a year and a half, actually. This is when you'll know much more soon when you get closer to that point, because right now there are so many variables, and this short time period is a long time in politics. Anything can happen, and we don't know if there'll be a challenge to President Biden or not, or who that challenger might be, depending on how well the economy does, depending on how well we get back on track with our democracy. And if the people want to reward President Biden for that, I think the only concern that some people have is that President Biden's birthday is coming up. Happy birthday, President Biden. He'll be 80 years old next week, this coming week, actually, 80 years old, the oldest president that we've had. He still seems to be in pretty decent shape and health and mental acuity, but some people are concerned about the age factor, and that's why some are urging him to pass the torch on to the next generation. But we won't know that until another few months at least as to which direction the party will be going in and the country itself.
All right, and one last one. Kamala Harris, I believe that she worked really hard for months, traveling across the country to make sure that the Democrats made some headway. So perhaps she deserves some credit. Does that beef up her credentials and set her up maybe for the big job? Absolutely.
Vice President Harris has been remarkable in these last few months in campaigning for the Democrats and helping them do as well as they did. And besides that, she is sitting in the second most powerful position in the United States. She's a heartbeat away from the presidency. Just by her being there for 2 years gives her a lot of credibility. And I think that her stature has grown in the last few months, and she will have a good shot at this if she decides to run. And most of the time when vice presidents choose to run, they win the nomination. So it's quite interesting to see how it'll go for Vice President Harris. And she's set a historical record. She's the first African-American woman to be vice president, the first Asian-American woman to be vice president. Her Mama's from India. It's very remarkable, this wonderful background that she has. And I think people better watch and see how she'll do, because I think she'll do very well in the next few months.
Peter Mathews, thank you so much. Always great getting your thoughts and insights on matters American. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you. All right, that's Peter Mathews, a professor at political science and international relations at Cypress College in the United States. And so the story with the midterm elections is that it's a good moment for the Democrats and perhaps an inflection point for the Republicans.